Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Ted here. So I'm going to make a quick video about surviving the upcoming election cycle. So normally back in the old days, we would say, hey, November is going to be here, November 2024 or whatever. As soon as that's over, the craziness stops and politics goes back to being boring. And very few people were really interested in politics up until the time of an election. And then people showed up on election day and they did their civic duty, and then they went right back to their lives. There was such a little interface between the circus that is politics and people. And one of the things I would offer to you, one of the ways we define totalitarianism is there's no barrier between private society, right, and the state. There's no barrier between the individual and the state. There's civil society, what we have in a democracy, what we have in the United States, is those institutions or organizations, things that buffer us from the control of the state. And those things could be things like the church, the school, organizations, lobbying groups, you name it. It was something that kept a buffer between the coercion of the state and the liberty of the individual. I would offer to you that we're seeing definitely an attrition of civil society in the United States, and that the border or the buffer between the state and the coercion of the state, and I'm agnostic here. Democrats, Republicans, left, right, I don't care. The state and the individual, that's being attrited. So, and I think a lot of that is because of the way we address politics. So I'm going to give you 3 things that I employ to help me get through the upcoming political cycle. And those quickly are: 1, remember this is a game for people. 2, illusion. Remember the illusion. And finally, always look for transparency and the tools of transparency. So to begin with, I'm reminded of a quote from Axel Oxenstierna. Was his name. He was a Swedish statesman, and he wrote a letter to his son. I think his son's name may have been Johan. And he said, "Do you not know, my son, with what little wisdom the world is governed? Do you not know, my son, with what little wisdom the world is governed?" The second thing I would offer is, one time I was in confession, and this priest and I were talking, and he told me, he said, you would be a much happier man if you were less judgmental. And judgment and joy struggle to coexist. You can't be really judgmental and have a life filled with joy. So that was pretty good advice, and I tried to apply it. So let's get to it. One thing before we begin. And it sounds kind of hypocritical saying this because I just talked about judgment. But there's a term for this called kakistocracy. And a kakistocracy, some people define it as a government of the stupid. But it's also, you can look at it in a more euphemistically way and say that it's a government of the least capable. And I think that's what we have. And I'm going to explain why. So first of all, this is a game. There are whole industries that peddle outrage in this country because outrage gets people to move. It gets people to donate money. It gets politicians to do things. It changes policy. Outrage, not intellect, not common sense, not virtue. It's outrage that moves things in our country. And so what do I mean by that? Well, we know roughly now the numbers of people in the United States. So about 30% identify as Democrats, 30% as Republicans, and about 40% are in the middle. And so what you really have is you have this polarization where the people who vote most often, we call them, I think, 4 or 5 star voters if you're involved in a campaign. Those are the guys you want to hit first. The people who donate, the people who are attuned to politics are at the polls. Okay, the ends right here. This middle right here, where most people are, and I think most of us would put ourselves there. It's a false dichotomy to be either or, right? That's a logic fallacy. But I don't think we teach logic fallacies in our schools anymore. And if we do, people sure forget them. I know when I listen to the news, I hear a lot of logic fallacies. Politicians and those who run politicians and those who run the political machines in this country they want to energize the poles. Okay, they want to energize the base. And they want to push that out as far as possible. But this middle right here, they want that to be turned off. Politicians get up and pound their chest about, voter turnout should be high, do your civic duty. That's disingenuous. If you're in the middle, I don't think they really want you to vote. They want you to stay home. And the way they get you to stay home is they turn you off. They turn you off to the system. They turn you off. It's just, how many of you, when you go to vote, you're not voting for something, you're voting against something. You're not picking the better of two alternatives. You're not picking the better of two candidates or three candidates, whatever. You are picking the least worst option. And you're doing it because it's your duty, not because you want to. Okay? You hear politicians nowadays when they're running for office, they don't say, I'm running for office X. They're saying, I'm running against so-and-so. I'm running against my opponent. It's always, I'm counter to this. Okay? Judgment and joy cannot coexist. But it's designed to turn off you right here in the middle, where people think. They want to turn off thought, and they want reflexive control right here. They want to anger you to the point that you go and you donate, you click. The media are really good at this. The lurid headlines, the garbage that they propel. They want you to hit click, read it, respond, and then move on to another story. And so the first thing I'd offer to you is remember, it's a game to people. They peddle anger. And anger, often, in my experience, is a product of fear. And fear that something's being taken away from you. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book back in 93, I think it is, called Out of Control. And he said that, America is losing its moral power in the world. Every other form of power in the United States is predominant. At least in 1993 we were. And in some sense, even today, like economics or military power, whatever. But with our moral power, we're in decline. And he says that one of the problems with that is the fact that politics has gone from being about ideas and about virtues, and now it's basically about consumption and who gets what, not about grand ideas. So think about it. If you're a politician and you can appeal to people's, hey, they're going to take this from you, that stimulates fear. Fear stimulates anger. Anger gets people to click. Anger gets people to donate. Anger gets people to vote. Anger gets people fired up. It turns off the middle. So, Epictetus says that, remember that he who angers you becomes your master. He who angers you becomes your master. And then the other thing I love it that Epictetus says is that if someone succeeds in provoking you, remember that your mind is complicit in its provocation. If someone succeeds in provoking you, remember that your mind is complicit in its provocation. So it's in their interest not to necessarily misrepresent things, but to embellish, obviously, but also to exaggerate, to make you think that, the number of people being killed by the police is this. Well, no, not really. It's much smaller. Or the number of drag shows on military bases, probably not. I was in the military a long time. I never saw a drag show. Saw some other weird stuff, but I'm not going to talk about that. Clubs are crazy places. But it's in their interest to exaggerate things that anger people. And some of that's righteous anger. We should be angry about unlawful killings. We should be angry about, certain types of behaviors that are inappropriate for audiences. Absolutely. But it's in a politician's interest to exaggerate that. To anger you, to make you fear, to make politics about consumption and not about ideas. To turn off the middle. The second thing is the illusion, okay? Machiavelli says, the great thing about politics, power, is the fact that all can see but few can touch. It's in your interest to appear to be this, but you don't have to really be. To appear to be religious and virtuous, but you don't have to be. Right? So I think about that because I think about some of the issues, and I've been following Joe Biden. 14 years old, 1988. That's when I remember. That's how I learned the word plagiarism. Was then Senator Biden was running for president, and he was plagiarizing the speeches of Neil Kinnock and Bobby Kennedy, word for word, word for word. But the great thing about Biden was he was always, whatever the issue was, he always had a story or a narrative, not the truth. It's the narrative that aligned with the issue. He could always be, wherever the issues are going, he's right there, right? I mean, in the 80s, people were naturally, absolutely morally justified in being angry about drunk driving. And Biden would come out and say, my wife was killed by a drunk driver. Well, his first wife, I'm sorry, that's terrible. That's absolutely horrible what happened to his first wife and to his daughter. And the pain that caused him and his family is, I can't imagine that. But it was a lie. His wife was not killed by a drunk driver. His wife was actually at fault. I think she ran a stop sign or a stoplight. And he defamed another man's character for political points. No matter what if it's a story, if he's at the Naval Academy, he was accepted to the Naval Academy. If it's about, X, well, he was Y. He's got it. Donald Trump, same thing. There's an illusion. It's the illusion. It's what I'm projecting. It's not what I really am. It's what I project. So, say January 6th. You cannot tell me that the things he said, and those were his followers, and yet he says I wasn't responsible? Well, okay, granted, he was never a naval officer. He was never the captain of a ship, but you know what? He was in command. He's the president of the United States. He is responsible. The buck stops here, right? Back when we were a country of ideals, that's what we believed. That's what our presidents upheld. The buck stops here, Harry Truman. But now we hear, people do this because they love me. Well, that was Charles Taylor's defense when he was on trial at The Hague. I remember that. I remember watching that. I didn't order that. People did it because they love me. That's disingenuous. And I think that's if President Trump wants to be president again, he needs to address that. If he wants to be if he wants to be an effective president, but if he wants history to be any way kind to him, he needs to address that. And he needs to surround himself with people who aren't sycophants, people who are going to tell him the truth, rather than just fire them. Ron DeSantis. I'll just offer this up. Did you ever notice when he swore in as governor of Florida back in 2019? I guess it'd be 2019. He was elected in 2018. Look at the clothes Casey DeSantis was wearing. She looked like Melania Trump. Do you think she just pulled something out of her closet? No, that was staged. Joe Biden, the Bidens, they want to project themselves like we are the Kennedys. They act like we're like the Kennedy family. We got a big compound and all this other stuff, and we like the booze, and we have our share of troubles. They're not the Kennedys. The Kennedys were masters at illusion. They were, many of them were sick. Many of them were on drugs or alcohol. They covered up mental illnesses, all kinds of stuff. If you ever want to read about where the rot began in this country's politics, read about the Kennedy family and how they manipulated things. Read about President Kennedy's health. So, illusion. All can see, few can touch. Look through the illusion. Look through the manipulation. Look through the media. Okay? What's the truth? Watch how many of these guys walk around with makeup bags. These are dudes, by the way, and they have makeup bags. So I find it interesting. I just got to pick on Matt Gaetz for a second. For a dude who is as anti-drag queen or whatever as he says he is, I think he's kind of in good competition with them as far as the makeup goes. The dude wears a lot of makeup. I'm like, okay, well, that's you be you, bro. All right. Third, transparency. Transparency in what you consume and what you see. When you have a country of ideas, you have institutions. Ideas are virtues. Gertrude Himmelfarb, she was kind of a writer, thinker, philosopher, columnist, whatever. She once said that the downfall or the error of our society is that we live in a society that used to be virtue-based but now is value-based. It's what you value and not necessarily virtue, right? We talk about virtue signaling. Well, I think that's a misnomer. I think they're just, virtue is transcendent, right? Virtue doesn't try to say I'm better than you, right? That's a value. But we've become that kind of society that we're no longer we're a virtue-based society, we're a value-based society. And with that, we've seen a decline in trust of our institutions. I read an interesting article that apparently back in 1958, when the Pew Research began to ask people, do you trust the U.S. government to always or most often do the right thing? Something like 2/3 of the American public said yes. And until 1966, the numbers were about even between Democrats and Republicans. Very high trust in government. But since about 2007, it's never gotten above 30%. And it most often trust in government correlates with whoever's in the White House. So if a Republican's in the White House, more Republicans trust the government. If a Democrat, it's more, just the same. More Democrats trust the government. But it's not gotten above 30% since about 2007. Because we used to have institutions, we used to be a country of ideas, we used to have a politics of ideas, we used to be virtue-based, not value-based. But now it's value-based, and it's about divvying up the spoils, right? It's about power. It's a contest of power. So transparency, what do I mean by that? When you hear about like the Dobbs decision or the case with Hunter Biden or the indictments of President Trump, how many of you actually go online and don't read the news, but actually read the charging documents, read the decisions in the Supreme Court, read the Durham report? I've read those, and they're just exceptional reads, and they're jaw-dropping. But we don't we don't go to the primary sources anymore. We rely on these interlocutors who have these agendas. And obviously, and these people, quite honestly, these experts, trust me, I've met many of these experts when I was the president of the Tiger Bay Club. I used to go up to DC a lot, hang out, do my Navy thing, and I'd run into a lot of the experts. It's somewhat of a kakistocracy. We are governed by the least capable of our society. They want you to be enraged. They want you to not think. They want you to respond emotionally. And so I would offer to you that when you get upset about these things, ask, what's the agenda? Look at the packaging. Look at how these things are packaged. Listen, what are the logic fallacies that are being employed? I mean, I was thinking about that yesterday just when I was reading about the Biden plea deal getting rejected by the judge. And I actually read the transcript of the conversation the judge had with the attorneys. And then I read, some of the commentary like, well, this was a Trump-appointed judge and boom, 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 boom. No, this was highly irregular, what was going on there. This was highly unusual, the way the attorneys presented that. And good on the judge for actually taking the time and reading through the deal and finding the stuff they were trying to conceal. She called them on it. The fact that, yes, he is under investigation for other things. He's asking for this blanket immunity. There is something else there. But the system is working. Just because the answer is no doesn't mean that the process is broken. Just because I don't get the answer I want doesn't mean that the system is bad. Sometimes the answer is no. There are decisions the Supreme Court has made that I have definitely disliked. There are decisions that have come out of the courts at all levels that have angered me. I've let myself be angered by them. The president has done things that I definitely disagreed with, but we used to be a society of institutions, and I trust the process, and the process has to be respected. So that's just it, really quick. Just want to offer that to you. 3 things as we approach the 2024 elections. First of all, remember, it's a game. They peddle outrage. Okay. Second, it's an illusion. Okay, all can see, few can touch. Always ask yourself, what's the agenda? Examine the reasoning behind what they're saying. Look how they're packaging things. Always ask yourself, what's the truth? You can get, I got dozens. I'm getting a lot of donors. A lot of these small donors are helping me out. Well, no, I just made a loan to myself to my campaign of $1 million. That's why I raised $1 million. That's happened. Or my small donors just happen to be, people, like 90-something% of my donors live outside of my district, that kind of stuff. Happens all the time, and that's all publicly available information. And that goes to the third point, transparency. Go to the primary sources. Be your own analyst. Okay? Don't rely on the experts. The experts, the people who have expert opinions, okay? These are opinions, not assessments. These are not impartial people. So that's it very quickly. Thank you for your 20 minutes. Please feel free to share, like, comment. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And if you want me to, I'll make some more on this and other issues. Thank Thank you so much. Have a great day.